So, hi everyone, and welcome to Architecture in the Den with me, your host Lisa Rains from Pride Road, the Architectural Practice Franchise. And today I'm delighted to welcome Gregory Cowan. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, Lisa. Hello, everyone. My name is Gregory Cowan. I'm an Australian born and trained architect, and I moved to the UK 17 years ago, plus a few days. And I've been here working in London for most of that 17 years. With a year abroad, nearly 2 years abroad in Mongolia, but I've also been working in some other European countries. And I've recently retrained as a coach, as a life coach, and I've started a new enterprise as the architect's coach.
Awesome. So, I know we we have regular chats, Gregory and I. We are co-hosts on Clubhouse on a Monday morning. The room is constructive together. It's 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, bright and early before kind of the work week starts. And it's a really nice gathering of people, quite a few architects in the group. But a topic that comes up every now and again is the difference between coaching and mentoring.
Yes, indeed.
Put you on the spot there, Greg.
It's a
Um,
great topic.
yeah, I wonder if you can just elaborate. I mean, um, oh, I keep on getting told off because I keep on getting forgetting to plug Pride Road, the architectural practice franchise. And in Pride Road, we provide both coaching and mentoring. So I provide the mentoring, and the franchisees mentor each other. But in addition to that, we do have a coach that we use, and they are two very different things. And often there is quite a bit of confusion between the two. But Greg, would you like to clarify?
Sure, sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I actually come to coaching from mentoring, and
Yeah.
I've been mentoring for some time. I realized recently I was mentored when I was a university student, and I was mentored by a senior practitioner in architecture in Perth, in Australia, where I trained. And I didn't really understand much about mentoring at that point, but I got a sense it was to do with asking a more mature and experienced colleague for advice. And I don't think I was very challenging in my questions, but I went along with the scheme that was run by my local architecture association. It was the West Australian chapter of what was then the Royal Australian Institute of Architects. It's now called the Australian Institute of Architects. And I would ask him about, the prosaic nature of running an architect's practice, and about, what it's like to work as an architect. And then fast forward to more recently, I was involved in a project called Fluid Diversity Mentoring at the RIBA. I was working at the RIBA, and I got involved in Architects for Change, which was a campaign group which wanted to try to make the architecture profession in the UK more reflective of the diversity of the society that we live in, rather than looking predominantly male and white and senior. And I was very interested in that campaign, and I started mentoring with Fluid with someone called Dana Walker. And I got some great experience there, and found some things were very different to what I remembered from my early experience of mentoring as a mentee. And I, I guess I did have that experience, that it was a younger person looking for guidance from a more experienced person, or from someone with more power than them, perhaps. And then I realized from that experience that it doesn't have to be that way. It could be reversed, that somebody could ask for advice from a more experienced person without being in a program, and also that there could be some mutual exchange, which kind of leads on to what coaching is, because that's where I was actually discussing this with a coaching colleague last night, is that it's about the sort of equivalent exchange between peers. Coaching is more of a flat method where you're both human and you both try to solve things together, more so than one having the answer from their experience and the kind of expertise, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
So although there are coaching methods, and I guess that involves expertise, sort of psychological methods to unravel problems, coaching broadly is more of an equal exchange than an asking for advice from a more trusted and experienced mentor. I mean, the mentor word comes from the kind of Western tradition of a sort of a more trusted senior colleague, and the coaching word comes more from sports, I suppose, where somebody stands beside the track and shouts out to the athlete to go faster, but also they're there for the long term and they help them to achieve the goals that they want to achieve without the coach necessarily being capable of the same speeds that the athlete is capable.
Mm. Thank you very much. Yes, I've sort of been sort of party to coaching, I think, since I set up my business originally back in 2010. Before that, yeah, I'd always reached out for mentors. And like you say, it can be really intimidating. And sometimes there's not necessarily you haven't necessarily got the appropriate questions to ask, or they're not quite appropriate. Whereas a coach, as you say, is kind of more of a personal, internal kind of investigation. And yeah, certainly in the business realm, sort of coaching has been really, really good for me. And I've been, on the RIBA mentor program, and I've sort of had a few RIBA sort of students myself over the last few years, and that is enjoyable, and just trying to help. But it's quite specific when quite specific questions like, how do I do my CV, and can you have a look, and can you have a look at my portfolio, and lots of, oh, can you tell me who your contacts are, can I have a job please?
I mean, I've had that too with even with non-architect coaching clients, where they are going through a career change and they would also like to get some contacts and maybe get into your LinkedIn and see if there's someone in there that could be valuable for them. So I think there are some things that are applicable beyond architecture there that they're to do with CV writing and so on. I do quite a lot of that, and I think that goes. Although it's useful to have someone who's done an architecture CV, it is also something that is broadly applicable, and you can have almost anyone with some experience looking at your CV and saying, well, this stands out to me and this doesn't stand out as much.
Mm-hmm. So just going back to your journey, so what brought you to the UK?
Right. Well, I had been at the end of a 10-year period of working as an academic. I'd been teaching in a university in Western Australia during the 1990s, and it had been quite an intense period where I first had gotten involved from being an architect to getting into academia, but not being a qualified academic. I was more qualified as an architect than I was as an academic. I had been working in Austria, and my university in Western Australia sort of snapped me up and said, we want to know all about Austria, and can you share with us all your wonderful transparencies of what you did in Austria, and tell us more about the scene in Europe and Britain and Germany and so on. And of course, I jumped at the opportunity. But then, after 10 years working in that university and also working in a twinning program between Perth and Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, I was somewhat exhausted and wrung out by the experience. And also, I had not become qualified as an academic. I was still finishing my master's, because at that time I had my Part 2 qualification, and so I was fully qualified in Australia. This was before the master's became part of the Part 2 qualification. And then I went on to do a master's by research as an academic qualification rather than as a professional one. And then at that time I realised I would like to go and get some wider experience outside Australia, as I'd been sort of dining out on my Austrian experience for the last several years. It was time to get some more international experience.
And then you moved across.
I moved to London, and I quickly found myself. I had a little desk at the Institute for Australian Studies, the Menzies Centre in Russell Square, which was very nice. That the then part of the University of London gave me a little desk where I could study Australian studies or write about Australian studies, because I had one publication related to Australian Aboriginal culture and architecture. And I then worked in the UK. I worked at Kingston University, and I worked in a bookshop and some other things before I eventually came to REBA and got interested in international development. And
so when you first came over to the UK, did you have anything set up when you moved across, or?
I had one colleague, the one who I worked with at Kingston University, who I'd met at a series of conferences in Asia and in Australia. That's Sarah Chaplin, now Professor Sarah Chaplin, who became the head of school in Kingston University. And so I went and knocked on her door in whatever way you do that in those days. It probably was literally a phone call rather than an email. And so I found a way to get going with the Kingston University. But all the time I was thinking I wanted to do further study, and I couldn't afford it, because I wanted to study at the Berlage in Rotterdam, and then, or the Hague, I think it was at that time, and then I couldn't afford the fees, so I was kind of saving up for that. Then I got a place at the London Consortium, which was a new university that had been formed out of the Tate, the AA, and one other university, and again I couldn't afford the fees, so I kept putting off the enrolment until I could afford the fees, and eventually I had to give it up, the place.
Right. I mean, it's after university. No, for me, after I'd done my Part 3s, I went over to New York, and I remember at the time trying to get a job from the UK over in New York. So it was before Twin Towers came down. It was it 2000? No, before then. 98, 99. And there was, emails weren't really a thing back then. I think they started to become a thing whilst I was there, but yeah, I think everything was done by fax. Do you remember faxes?
I do, and I even remember doing a project. I think that was when I was still in Austria. I did a project with a friend in Australia where we would send each other long drawings that were 2 or 3 meters long by fax, and I found that very exciting.
Did you have to piece them together side by side?
No, because at that time you could get a roll of hydrostatic paper, or whatever you call it, electrostatic paper, which was attached to the fax machine, and would just make a drawing as long as you needed. So I loved that.
It was David Hockney did. I remember he did fax drawings as well.
That's right. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. That's great fun.
If anyone's listening and doesn't know what a fax machine is, go and have a quick Google.
I've got a little sketchbook of my drawings from that project called Companion City, and
Yeah.
I would love to resurrect that and maybe publish it sometime. It'd be maybe quite nostalgic. It was about living in Europe versus living in Australia or something like that.
Mm. Oh, faxes were such fun. Apart from when you're trying to send AIs and drawings and stuff over to contractors.
But
Which
it,
we,
but it's yeah, it's amazing. That would have been around the turn of the century, like you say, around the end of the 90s, that
yeah.
emails started to come in. So I think by the time I came to the UK in 2003, I probably could have sent an email to Sarah Chaplin, but I might have actually phoned her and arranged to meet her in person because that was, part of the point of coming over to
Yeah, we
Europe.
didn't really rely, you couldn't really trust emails.
No, that's
So
right.
I
Yeah, I
don't think
mean,
we knew whether things had been received or sent or got to the right person.
and the key thing was that email was all desktop based. It wasn't mobile, so you would have had to go home to check your email
Yeah,
on your desktop rather than just refer to it on your phone. Because
yeah.
of course, smartphones were a long way away at that time. But I did remember that one other historical event that was of interest to me in 2003. At the beginning of 2003, there was a big protest in Perth about the invasion of Iraq, and
Mm,
Australia and America had been, well, let's say Australia had been drawn into this. Australian troops had been drawn into this with America and Britain as part of a sort of a coalition, and I was very unhappy about that at the time.
mm,
I think it was Tony Blair was involved. So when I came over to the UK, I was also involved in some protests about the invasion of Iraq,
mm.
and I felt that I was coming to a place where my voice might be heard a bit better than it was in Perth.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So there was some sort of, I guess I had relented to the idea that London was somehow the centre of the world, which an idea that I always hated as I grew up, thinking that people in London were so arrogant to think that they were in the centre of the world.
Mm.
But I did like going to Parliament Square and making a protest there, as though my voice might matter.
Yeah. And, I mean, that's an interesting one. Is London the centre of the world?
I say that with quite a sort of a wry kind of post-colonial sort of glint in my eye, knowing that I think we kind of challenged that view, and I think most Londoners are too polite to say that they think that is the case anyway.
Mm.
Maybe people in Manchester would say it more willingly than people in London.
I mean, it's interesting. Kind of running Pride Road as a national business. Um, trying to get from one end of the country to the other. Oftentimes, you have to go through London. So London becomes a hub. Even if you're going far, geography is rubbish, far west, you often go into London to go back out again. And I'm looking at a map sort of on my side. So, I've kind of got my franchise locations kind of dotted around. So we've got some franchises there, and there. And, I think London's just going to naturally become our hub, sort of rather than Manchester, because it'll take the same amount of time for everyone to get down, irrespective of where we are. So
It's nice to see the map with the kind of red, the kind of concentric centering on the middle of the continent of the British Isles, rather than down in the bottom corner, which most maps tend to emphasise London down there on the Thames as being the centre. Where your map, even from a distance, it
yeah.
really looks like Manchester is the centre. So I do appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we've got our two franchisees up here, you see. So, but then there's like an excerpt of London, so that's London. You can see where we are at the moment. But it's exciting. I love this kind of swathe that we've got going on. So I've split the country into 155 territories, and we've got sort of territories over in Northern Ireland, Scotland, some in Wales, South Wales rather than North Wales. Well, no, we have um, available, and then like a lot of the rest of the country.
Would you say, Lisa, that distribution of territories that you mentioned, do those follow sort of residential settlement rather than just population distribution? Is it to do with the kind of
It's
maybe
both.
suburban residential?
Yeah, it's both. Basically, is each territory 70,000 owner occupier homes within like a 20-minute, 30-minute travel distance. So there's a geography exercise as well as a population and density. So you can see kind of in North Wales, the grey areas don't stack up. I don't know, you probably can't see that well, but the grey areas don't stack up. So North Wales don't. These big white swathes don't stack up either. They're too rural. Yeah, so in Northern Ireland, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 territories. But then if you're going up to Londonderry, that doesn't stack up. Sort of like around Newcastle, there's quite a few, but then just slightly north of that, it doesn't. Yeah, it was an exercise I went through, like sort of quite at the early days of the franchise, when I was trying to work out sort of how big a territory should be for a franchise. And I kind of went through a franchise mapping service. They're called Atlas. And it was just fascinating. Cost a flipping fortune to do it. Well, you're dealing with OS maps and like all these really heavy data. Kind of like the process of producing a map that's got outlines was just, it's such heavy, such heavy data when I was trying to print them out.
I do love the physicality of a map on the wall,
Yeah,
and the pins and the bits of wall or whatever it is that connect all those lines with the centre. I do
yeah,
appreciate that.
yeah. No, it's kind of just good to see, and just when I'm on the phone in fact, was on the phone I was doing a podcast a couple of days ago with Roger Wu. So he was an ex RIBA Asia Council member. So I was talking to him about the RIBA Council elections. And, we were on the phone and we kind of just Google Map Earth where he was. And that was just amazing.
Yeah.
It's just really nice to kind of see. I mean, that is one thing that kind of lockdown's done for us, is kind of brought us closer together.
Yeah.
You know,
I do like that, and I was thinking of that actually this morning and yesterday teaching, because yesterday when I was teaching a student in Bulgaria, he was sitting on his tractor looking after the goats in a field while studying critical thinking for business at the University of Wales, and I was thinking what a great sort of spatial and sort of intellectual and academic sort of frisson was there with, on one hand the rolling fields of this part of Bulgaria and the roving sheep and goats, and on the other hand, the conception of the University of Wales where he's enrolled as being this kind of centre of culture to learn about business in the Western world and everything. Is quite a nice sort of paradox, I guess, between how people are studying in different places, and then he was having to speak to his group members on the mobile phone in order to have a Teams breakout room
Mm.
with other students. So one was driving a minicab somewhere near Slough. Another one was, in a sweet shop in North London at a Jewish sweet shop or something. And so there was this great sort of dislocation of people as part of university classroom
Mm.
nowadays.
Mm.
And actually, it also reminded me of an experience when I was traveling in India, and I'd met this camel herder in India, and he'd said to me, "Oh, are you from London? Do you know anyone at Oxford University? Because I have a degree in comparative literature from Oxford University, and I'm just looking to reconnect to do some future studies there." And this was a guy with a bunch of camels in Rajasthan, and I guess the sort of people are so many people come to UK for the sort of exported education, and then they return to some other place.
Yeah.
Um, yes, it's a strange world. I guess I even experienced that somewhat from my studies in Perth. That I had people who I learned from who had studied in London or in the UK.
Did you
Um,
say you went to Mongolia?
That's right. So after I'd been working at Reba, I
Yeah.
also got involved in this project where I was supporting students who were doing projects abroad,
Mm.
including for the tsunami and other things. And then the agency voluntary service overseas, VSO, which is a very established overseas volunteering organisation, was recruiting for an architecture teacher in Mongolia.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find anyone among the students in the UK who was suitable, so
Yeah.
I had to go there myself.
Right.
And it happened that I was quite interested in Mongolia because I had done my master's degree on nomadic architecture, and
Right.
I'd already studied the Mongolian yurts as an example of nomadic architecture, of sort of non-European nomadic architecture.
Yes. So,
So I was there for nearly 2 years as part of a capacity building project
yeah.
in an architecture school. So Mongolia became independent in 1992, and then it's had this sort of rapid urban development. And as part of that, there's been springing up some architecture schools,
Mm.
and one of those needed someone to help the staff to develop. So I guess that was one of my first experiences with coaching and mentoring as well, was working with Mongolian architecture teachers.
So whereabouts in Mongolia was that? 'Cause
Well, I'm glad you asked that. So the capital of Mongolia is Ulaanbaatar.
yeah.
It's the loosely translated the Red Hero. It's a Russian name for the center. It's the modern center rather than the kind of spiritual center, which is where the monastery was.
Yeah.
And that was developed mainly in the modern era. And that center has a peri-urban area, which is a bit like a suburban area, but it's peri-urban rather than suburban because it's kind of an unplanned settlement that surrounds the capital.
So if I was looking, I'm going to go on to Google. So
Mm,
what shall I
yeah.
type in?
Yeah, so you could type in Western Ulaan
Western UL.
AAN
Yeah.
BAA
CAA.
TAR.
CAR.
Yeah, that's the city is Ulaanbaatar, but then the west of Ulaanbaatar is the part. Okay, we're zooming out and zooming back in.
Oh, I'm heading to
It's come up with the Best
Best
Western
Western.
Hotel. Okay, that's fair enough. So what you're seeing there is the kind of, let's say, the traditional formal architectural centre from the 20th century.
Yeah.
And then surrounding this core is a huge pancake of what they call gear districts or unplanned settlements, what you see in Latin America as sort of favelas or encampments of tents. Maybe if you zoom out a little bit more, you'll see at the edges you've got like a very fine-grained sprawling areas of
Like down.
yurts.
Yeah.
Yeah, all those ones outside the kind of geometric edge of the city. Yeah, there we
Oh,
go.
wow.
So these things called horo are districts of yurts. So all those there, you've got some
Wow.
formal buildings, but many yurts, which are the circular figures there,
Oh,
like little
wow.
spaceships. Yeah,
So
that's
there's
really
quite, it
cool.
looks like there's quite a bit of infrastructure there.
Yeah, so the infrastructure is the roads, the unsealed roads,
Hmm.
and then there are wells for collecting water every few blocks,
Yeah.
but there's no piped water,
Right.
and there is no electricity other than hookups which come from sort of informally arranged electricity distribution systems.
Wow.
Um, so it's different to a suburb in the sense that it lacks sewage or electricity infrastructure. It's a kind of temporary encampment, but it looks quite, as you say, it looks quite structured.
It
There are
does
a
look quite.
series of small
Yeah.
compounds. So each Mongolian has a sort of a legal right to claim a compound, a little bit like a mining claim.
Yeah.
And these just evolved once the capital was built at the beginning of the 20th century. These little encampments just started to mushroom right around the centre of the formal city
Hold on.
as a kind of
Okay,
informal.
got a bit of a street view on this main road that looks
Oh
like it
yeah,
splits the
yeah, I agree.
industrial to these encampments on the
That's right.
left.
Yeah, you can see a lot of modern vehicles, but also some kind of agricultural vehicles. And
Yeah.
nowadays, you don't see as many people with horses and carts like you did
Yeah.
10 years ago when I was there. And the roads there are more sealed roads than there used to be.
And what's the
Um,
temperature like over there?
yeah, really good question. So in summer around 40 Celsius, and
Yeah.
in winter about minus 40 Celsius.
So, wow.
Very cold in winter. So it's what we call an extreme continental climate because it's a long way from the ocean.
Mm,
The weather patterns are very stable and it tends to stay the same temperature. It doesn't change very rapidly. You don't really get weather systems. It tends to be quite dry.
mm.
There's not a lot of rainfall. The rivers are mostly dry.
And
The u-
how do they deal with the extreme temperatures in the earths?
Yeah, so these little yurts have central heating in the crudest sense. They have um, oil or coal heaters
Mm,
in the centre of the circular plan form,
yeah.
and everybody huddles around the heating in the centre. And so these little stoves are also hearths in the sense that they are a focus for the families and they're a place of cooking and place of focus for everything in family life, and that's very sort of significant in the lifestyle in Mongolia. But a lot of these small buildings, outbuildings that have been built, will also have some form of heating being rigged up, electric or maybe gas cylinder heating. But that's much less efficient than the one that's in the traditional
Mm,
yurt. So a lot of those buildings are not really used in the extreme winter time.
mm, mm. Well, I never thought I'd be looking at Mongolian yurts during a
You
podcast.
did, yeah, you did well there. You just zoomed straight in on it. That's incredible. Yeah, very adventurous. Yeah, I wish I could have done that. I did fly over Mongolia
Yeah,
about 6 months before I went there.
yeah,
And I was actually on an RIBA trip to Seoul in Korea for a validation at the Korean University of Arts.
yes.
And I flew over Ulaanbaatar and I thought, oh my goodness, am I really going to go down there? And it was just like a desert for so many hours. And then there was a tiny speck. And then I kept flying and I got to Seoul. I mean, Seoul's a long way from Europe anyway. But and I think only because I come from a fairly remote place anyway, I was able to prepare myself. Perth is meant to be the second most isolated city in the world after Ulaanbaatar, so
Right.
there's something in common there. Um, yeah.
I think I need to draw this to a close. Not quite sure how we're going to tie up those loose ends. So we're titling this piece The Architect's Coach. So if you want to get in touch with Gregory, how would someone find you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn and I have an about me / Gregory Cowan. You can find me at Constructive Together every Monday morning with Lisa on Clubhouse, and I'm running some other rooms as well. So yeah, I hope you can. Lisa will put a link maybe to my LinkedIn or something like that, or to
Oh,
my
do you want to
about me.
ping that over to me, and
Yeah,
I'll
sure,
pop it
I'll
into
do
your
that.
bio. Okay, well, thank you very much, Gregory, for coming on. It's that was really fun.
Well, it just shows you, Lisa, that you trust me enough to allow you to go into a completely other space, because you navigated, you came right outside your comfort zone and dived straight into a completely foreign environment. So I think that's a really good sign.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, well, if everyone's enjoyed listening, which I'm sure they have, please do subscribe to Architecture in the Den. If you want to contact me, you can find me on the Pride Road franchise website. So that's prideroadfranchise.co.uk, or email me Lisa at prideroad.co.uk if you want to come on as a guest. So thanks, Greg.
Thank
And
you, Lisa.
I'll see you, well, I'll hear you on Monday.
Yes, I
I
look forward to
constructed
that.
together.